They told me the attic would be quieter. That was the word my daughter-in-law Rachel used as she stood at the bottom of the stairs, smiling like she was offering me something kind. I was 64 years old, holding my suitcase, climbing into a space barely fit for forgotten boxes, while my own son Michael couldn't even look me in the eye. That was the night I realized I wasn't a guest in their home. I was a problem they were trying to hide. What they didn't know was that I stayed up there longer than I should have, because I was waiting, and on their anniversary night, I made sure everyone saw the truth. If you're listening right now, I'd really like to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? And tell me honestly, do you think betrayal from family hurts more than anything else? If this story already stirs something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. My name is Edna Barnes, and until a year ago, I believed I had lived a life that was, if not perfect, at least honest. I was married to my husband Robert for 42 years. He was the kind of man who fixed things quietly. Leaky faucets, broken shelves, even my worries, he had a way of making everything feel manageable. When he passed, it wasn't sudden, but that didn't make it easier. The house we built together in Hartford became too quiet, too heavy with memory. Every corner held a version of him I couldn't touch anymore. For months I tried to stay. I told myself it was strength, that holding on meant honoring him. But eventually the silence became louder than anything else, so I sold the house. I remember signing the papers with hands that didn't feel like mine. It wasn't just a house I was letting go of, it was the life I had known. But I told myself something hopeful, that maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. A smaller home, fewer responsibilities, maybe even peace. That's when my son Michael called. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you don't have to do this alone. Come stay with us for a while." He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. At the time, I thought it was love. Michael lives in West Hartford, in one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looks professionally trimmed and every mailbox matches the next. His house is large, larger than anything he grew up in, and when I first pulled into the driveway, I remember thinking how proud Robert would have been. Rachel opened the door before I even knocked. "Edna," she said, brightly stepping forward to hug me. "We're so glad you're here." She smelled like expensive perfume and something else I couldn't quite place, something sharp beneath the sweetness. Behind her, Michael stood with his hands in his pockets. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said. That was the first moment something felt off. Not wrong. Not yet. Just slightly out of place, like a picture frame tilted just enough that you notice it every time you walk past. Inside, the house was spotless. Not just clean, controlled. Every pillow arranged perfectly, every surface clear of clutter. It didn't feel like a home people lived in. It felt like a home people maintained. "Let me show you your room," Rachel said quickly, already turning down the hallway. The guest room was beautiful. Soft gray walls, fresh linens, a small vase of white flowers on the nightstand. It looked like something out of a magazine. "I hope it's comfortable," she said, watching my reaction carefully. "It's lovely," I replied, and I meant it. For a moment I felt relief. Maybe I had been wrong to worry. Maybe this really was what Michael said it was, a place to land while I figured out what came next. That evening, we had dinner together. Rachel had ordered takeout from a place she said was health-conscious but indulgent, and Michael poured wine like he was trying to recreate something normal. But even then, there were cracks. So Michael said casually halfway through his meal, "What did you end up doing with the proceeds from the house?" The question came too quickly, too smoothly. I set my fork down. "Most of it's in savings. Some investments Robert and I had set up. Nothing unusual." Rachel nodded, but her eyes lingered on me a second too long. "That's smart," she said. "You have to think about the future." "The future?" I asked. She continued lightly. "Long-term care, unexpected expenses, things like that." I smiled politely, but something in my chest tightened. "I've managed my finances for decades," I said. "I'm not too worried." Michael laughed, but it sounded forced. "Of course, Mom. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. It was such a simple phrase. But that night, lying in that too-perfect guest bed, I kept hearing it over and over in my head, taken care of or taken over. The next morning, I met Lily. She was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, scrolling on her phone, her long hair falling forward like a curtain. "Good morning," I said gently. She glanced up, surprised, like she hadn't expected anyone else to be awake. "Oh, hi." Her voice was quiet, almost cautious. "I'm your grandma," I added with a small smile. I know, she said quickly, then looked back down at her phone. Rachel walked in a moment later, her energy already sharp and focused. Lily, don't forget you have practice after school, she said, then turned to me. Edna, we usually keep mornings pretty structured here. I'll try not to disrupt anything, I replied. She smiled again, that same polished smile. I'm sure you won't. Over the next few days, I began to notice patterns. Rachel controlled everything, the schedule, the meals, even the tone of conversation. Michael deferred to her more than I expected, not in a loving way, but in a careful way, like he was always trying to avoid setting something off. And Lily watched. She didn't say much, but she noticed everything. I could feel it. One afternoon, while Rachel was out and Michael was still at work, Lily lingered in the kitchen while I made tea. You don't have to whisper here, I said gently when I noticed how softly she spoke. She looked at me, really looked this time. I'm not whispering, she said. But she was. Do you like it here, I asked. She hesitated. It's fine. That word again. Fine. The kind of word people use when the truth is more complicated. That evening, Michael brought up money again. Mom, he said, leaning against the counter, have you thought about consolidating anything? Making things simpler? Simpler for who I asked before I could stop myself? He blinked. For you. I just mean it might be easier if everything's in one place. Rachel stepped in smoothly. We're just trying to help, she said. After everything you've been through, it might be overwhelming to manage it all alone. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. I've been alone before, I said quietly. I'll manage. The room went still for a second. Then Rachel clapped her hands lightly. Well, we'll figure it out together. Together. But as I stood there watching the two of them exchange a look they thought I didn't notice, I realized something important. This wasn't just about helping me. This was about something else. Something they weren't saying out loud. And for the first time since I moved in, I felt it clearly. I hadn't come here to be supported. I had been brought here for a reason. I just didn't know what it was yet. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I think I would have left. If Rachel had looked me in the eye and said, "You don't belong here," or if Michael had told me plainly that I was an inconvenience, I might have packed my suitcase that very same day and walked out with what little pride I had left, intact. But that's not how it unfolded. It was slower than that. Quieter. The kind of change that creeps in so gently you almost convince yourself you imagined it. At first it was little things. Rachel began correcting me. Not directly, not in a way that could easily be called rude, but in small, persistent ways that made me feel misplaced. Edna, we usually don't use that pan, she'd say when I tried to cook something simple for dinner. Or, oh, we don't really eat that kind of food anymore when I offered to make one of Michael's favorite meals from when he was a boy. The first time she said it, I laughed it off. The second time, I apologized. By the third time, I stopped offering. Then it became my things. My sweaters were too bulky for the closet space. My books didn't match the aesthetic of the living room. Even the framed photo of Robert and me taken on our 30th anniversary was quietly moved from the side table to a drawer in the hallway. I just thought it might get damaged out here, Rachel explained when I noticed. I nodded, though something inside me tightened. It was like being erased in small, careful strokes. Michael noticed some of it. I know he did. But every time I looked at him, really looked, he would glance away or clear his throat or suddenly become very interested in whatever was on his phone. Mom, Rachel just likes things a certain way, he told me once. It's not personal. Not personal. That phrase again. Everything about it felt personal. A week later, the conversation came. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because Lily had stayed late at school and the house was unusually quiet. Rachel stood in the doorway of the guest room while I was folding my clothes. Edna, can we talk for a moment? She asked, her voice light, almost cheerful. Of course, I said. Michael was behind her, leaning against the hallway wall. He looked uncomfortable. That should have been my first real warning. Rachel stepped inside and closed the door halfway as if what she was about to say needed just enough privacy to seem considerate. So she began clasping her hands together. We've been doing some reorganization in the house. I waited. You know how Michael's been working from home more often lately? I nodded slowly. Well, she continued, we really need to expand his workspace. It's getting a bit cramped. I glanced around the room. The guest room. My room. And I asked carefully. Rachel smiled again, that same practiced, polished smile. We were thinking, she said, that it might actually be better for you to move upstairs. To the attic. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. The attic, I repeated. Oh, it's been fixed up, she said quickly. We've added insulation, cleaned it out. It's actually very cozy. And much quieter. You'd have more privacy up there. Privacy. The word echoed strangely in my mind. Michael shifted beside the door. It's just temporary, Mom, he added, until I get the office situation sorted out. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. Not cruelty, not even indifference, but something worse. Avoidance. He already knew this was wrong, and he was choosing it anyway. I swallowed slowly. Can I see it? I asked. Of course, Rachel said brightly, as if she had been waiting for that exact response. The attic stairs were narrow and steep, tucked behind a small door near the hallway closet. Rachel went first, moving quickly, confidently, like someone leading a tour. Michael stayed behind me. I could feel his presence without turning around. When I reached the top, Rachel flicked on a single overhead light. The space was not what she had described. Yes, it had been cleared out. Yes, there was a small bed pushed against one wall with a thin blanket folded neatly on top. But the ceiling sloped so low in places I had to tilt my head just to stand upright. The single window was small and dusty, letting in a narrow strip of light. The air felt stale, like it hadn't truly been lived in, just prepared. It's not much, Rachel admitted lightly, but it's comfortable, and really you won't be disturbed up here. I stepped forward, my suitcase still in my hand. The floor creaked under my weight. For a brief moment, I imagined Robert standing beside me. I imagined what he would say, what he would do, and I knew he would never have let this happen. Mom, Michael said softly behind me. I turned. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before sliding away. It's just for a little while, he repeated. A little while. I nodded. All right, I said. Rachel clapped her hands, once pleased. Great, I'll help you move your things. No, I said quickly. I can manage. Something in my voice must have surprised her because she hesitated. Then she smiled again. Of course. The move itself didn't take long. I carried my suitcase up those narrow stairs, then my clothes, then the few personal items I had allowed myself to bring. Each trip felt heavier than the last, not because of what I was carrying, but because of what I was leaving behind. When I brought up the photo of Robert, I paused for a moment at the bottom of the stairs. I looked around the house, the polished surfaces, the controlled silence, the life that didn't quite have space for me anymore. Then I climbed. That night, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed listening. From below, I could hear the faint sound of dishes being put away, the murmur of Rachel's voice, the low response of Michael. Normal sounds, family sounds, but they felt distant, like I was no longer part of them. I lay down, pulling the thin blanket over myself. The ceiling pressed close above me. The air felt different up there, thinner somehow. For a long time, I stared at the slanted roof, and then quietly I realized something I hadn't fully admitted yet. This wasn't temporary. Not really. This was a decision, a choice they had made, about me, about where I belonged. And as I lay there in the dark, listening to the life happening below me, I understood something else too. Rachel hadn't just moved me upstairs. She had already begun telling the world why. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen. Yes, she was saying, her tone light and conversational. Edna's staying with us now, but she prefers the attic space. She likes the quiet, says it reminds her of having her own little retreat. I stood at the top of the stairs, my hand resting on the railing. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened. Because in that moment it became painfully clear I wasn't just being pushed out of the house. I was being rewritten inside it. The attic changes you. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic, obvious way, but slowly, quietly, it shifts something inside you. The longer you stay there, the more you begin to feel like you belong there. Like maybe you really are something that should be kept out of sight. At first I told myself it was temporary. I repeated Michael's words like a promise I refused to question. Just for a little while, just until things settled, but days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. If anything, it became clearer that this wasn't an adjustment, it was a redefinition. I was no longer a guest, I was an arrangement. Every morning I would come down the narrow stairs carefully, already aware of myself in a way I hadn't been before. I walked quieter, spoke softer, made sure I didn't take up too much space. Rachel had a way of making that feel necessary without ever saying it outright. "Good morning," I would say. "Morning," she'd reply, already moving, already busy, already slightly impatient. The kitchen became a place I visited, not a place I belonged. If I made coffee, I cleaned everything immediately after. If I used a plate, I washed it before anyone could notice. If I sat too long, I felt it, the subtle shift in the air that told me I was overstaying something that wasn't mine. And then came the requests. They weren't demands. Not at first. "Edna, would you mind folding these?" Rachel would ask, leaving a basket of laundry near me without waiting for an answer. "Or could you just keep an eye on the oven while I run out for a bit?" Small things. Reasonable things. Things a family member might do without thinking. But the difference was in the expectation. It wasn't help. It was assumption. By the second week, I noticed something else. I was being included less and less. Dinner conversations became shorter when I was present. Sometimes they didn't happen at all. More than once, I came downstairs to find the kitchen already cleaned, the dishes done, and the three of them in the living room watching something together like I had never been part of the plan. "I didn't realize dinner was early tonight," I said once, trying to keep my voice light. Rachel glanced at me briefly. "Oh, we weren't sure if you'd want anything. You've been going to bed earlier, right?" I hadn't. But I nodded anyway. "It's fine," I said. Everything became fine. Fine was easier. Fine didn't cause tension. Fine didn't make Michael shift uncomfortably or Rachel tighten her smile. But fine was also a lie. The attic at night was the worst. During the day, I could at least distract myself. I could read, organize the few things I had brought with me, try to maintain some sense of routine. But at night, the silence changed. The house would settle. The pipes would creak. The wind would press softly against the roof, and the attic would hold every sound like it had nowhere else to go. That's when the loneliness felt different, sharper, more deliberate. I would lie there staring at the slanted ceiling and think about Robert. I thought about the way he used to leave the porch light on when I came home late. The way he always made sure there was space for me at the table in conversation in every part of our life. I thought about the house we built together and how I had left it behind, believing I was moving towards something safe. And then I would hear laughter from below, soft at first, then louder. Michael's voice. Rachel's. Sometimes even Lily's, though hers was quieter, more hesitant. And I would realize life was still happening down there. Just not with me. One night, maybe 3 weeks after I moved into the attic, I sat up in bed because I couldn't sleep. The laughter downstairs had gone on longer than usual. There had been music, too, something upbeat, something that felt like celebration. I checked the time, almost midnight. Curious, I slipped out of bed and walked quietly to the top of the stairs. I didn't go down. I just stood there listening. "We can't keep doing this," Michael was saying, his voice lower than usual. Doing what Rachel replied sharper. "Pretending everything's fine. The bills, the lower your voice," she snapped. There was a pause. Then Rachel spoke again, quieter now but more intense. "We're handling it. I told you once things are settled, it won't be a problem anymore. And how exactly is that going to happen?" Michael asked. Another pause. Then, "She's here, isn't she?" I froze. The words hung in the air like something physical. Michael didn't respond right away. "Rachel," he said finally, warning in his tone. What she shot back. "It's not like we forced her. She agreed to come. She sold her house. She has money sitting there doing nothing." My hand tightened on the railing. "We're not taking anything," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're not taking," Rachel repeated. "We're restructuring. Helping. It's the same thing." "It's not the same thing," he muttered. "It is if she agrees to it," Rachel said firmly. "And she will." "How do you know that?" "Because she doesn't have anywhere else to go." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. And then Rachel added almost casually, "And after the anniversary, things will be a lot easier." I stepped back from the stairs slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. After the anniversary. The phrase echoed in my mind. I didn't go back to bed right away. Instead, I sat in the dark trying to piece together what I had just heard. Money, pressure, a plan tied to a specific time, and me at the center of it. The next day, everything looked normal again. Rachel moved through the house with her usual efficiency. Michael left for work early. Lily sat at the table scrolling through her phone. But something had changed. Not in them. In me. I saw it now. The patterns. the positioning, the careful way Rachel controlled information, the way Michael justified things by not looking too closely. And Lily? Lily saw it too. That evening, as I sat at the small desk in the attic pretending to read, I heard a soft knock. I opened the door to find her standing there holding a mug. "I made tea," she said quietly. "For me," she nodded. I stepped aside, letting her in. She looked around the attic, her eyes taking in the low ceiling, the narrow bed, the single window. "They told my friends you like it up here," she said. I gave a small, sad smile. "Did they?" She nodded again. "They said you wanted your own space." I didn't answer. Lily set the mug down on the desk. "They lie a lot," she added softly. I looked at her then. Really looked. There was something in her eyes I recognized. Not just awareness, understanding. "What have you heard?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Then she shrugged like she was trying to make it seem like it didn't matter. "Enough." We stood there in silence for a moment. Then she turned to leave, pausing at the door. "They check the mail before you see it," she said without looking back. "Mom keeps some of it in her office drawer." And just like that, she was gone. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. The attic had been meant to hide me, to shrink me, to make me easier to manage. But instead, it had given me distance, perspective. And now, the first real piece of truth. The attic had become more than just a place I slept. It had become a place where things were forgotten. Or at least that's what Rachel must have believed. After Lily told me about the mail, about how Rachel checked it first, how she sometimes kept things hidden, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not in a frantic way, but in a quiet, persistent way that followed me through every moment of the day. What else had been kept from me? What else had been decided without my knowledge? I didn't confront anyone. That would have been my instinct before direct, honest, immediate. But something in me had changed. The attic had taught me patience. Or maybe it had forced it on me. So instead, I watched. And I waited. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Rachel had left to meet someone. She said it was a planning consultation for their upcoming anniversary party. Michael was still at work. Lily was at school. The house was quiet in a way it rarely was. I had gone up to the attic earlier that day to find an extra blanket. The nights had been getting colder, and the thin one I had wasn't enough anymore. The attic, despite being my assigned space, wasn't truly organized. There were still old boxes pushed into corners, things that clearly hadn't been touched in years. I had avoided going through them out of respect, or maybe out of habit. But that day, standing there with a chill settling into my bones, I told myself I had a reason. I knelt beside a stack of boxes near the far wall. Dust lifted into the air as I moved them, catching in the narrow beam of light from the window. The smell of old paper and cardboard filled the space. The first box held holiday decorations, faded ribbons, tangled lights, things that belonged to another time. The second box was heavier. When I opened it, I found folders. Not mine. Neatly labeled. Organized. Financial documents. I hesitated. This wasn't my business. But then again, neither was being moved into an attic. Slowly, I pulled one of the folders out. Mortgage statements. Another. Tax returns. My chest tightened. These weren't just old records. These were recent, carefully kept, carefully hidden. I flipped through a few pages, not fully understanding what I was looking for, yet just knowing that something about this felt wrong. And then I saw it. A folder that didn't belong with the others. It wasn't labeled in the same neat handwriting. Instead, there was a small sticky note attached to the front. And on that note, my name, Edna. My fingers froze. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then slowly, I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails. At first glance, they looked like standard correspondence, formal language, structured paragraphs. But as I began to read, the words started to blur into something sharper, more intentional, more dangerous. Once Evelyn's funds are accessible, I blinked. Evelyn? They hadn't even bothered to use my correct name in the draft. We should be able to secure refinancing options. My heart began to pound. Timing will depend on cooperation and documentation. I turned the page. If she resists, alternative arrangements, such as assisted living placement, may simplify matters. My hand trembled. Simplify matters. I read further. It may be helpful to position the transition as necessary for her safety, Given her age and recent loss, it would not be difficult to establish concern regarding her ability to manage independently. I stopped reading. The attic felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. I sat back slowly, the papers still in my hand. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't discomfort or intuition or unease. This was a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan, and I was at the center of it. I forced myself to keep reading. There were more emails, more exchanges. Rachel's name appeared frequently. The tone was always controlled, always professional, but beneath it there was something unmistakable. Intent. She wasn't asking questions. She was outlining strategy. Once we have access to combined funds, temporary assistance agreement, long-term solution, and then Michael agrees that this is the most practical path forward. I closed my eyes. That line stayed with me. Michael agrees. Not Michael is unsure. Not Michael needs convincing. Michael agrees. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe longer. Time felt strange in that moment, like it had slowed down just enough for everything to become painfully clear. They hadn't invited me into their home because they were worried about me. They hadn't insisted I move in because they loved me. They had brought me here because it made me easier to control, easier to influence, easier to position, and eventually easier to remove. The attic wasn't a compromise. It was the first step. I looked around the space again. The slanted ceiling, the narrow bed, the single window. This wasn't just where they had placed me. This was where they expected me to stay. Until I became manageable. Until I signed whatever they put in front of me. Until I believed whatever story they needed me to believe. Or until they convinced someone else that I couldn't make decisions for myself anymore. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Not then. The tears came later. That afternoon, I carefully placed everything back exactly as I had found it. Every folder, every paper, every box, no trace, no sign, because something inside me had shifted. Again. But this time, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't passive. It was sharp, awake. I walked downstairs slowly, my expression calm, my movements deliberate. When Rachel returned that evening, she greeted me the same way she always did. "Hi, Edna. How was your day, Quiet?" I replied. She smiled, satisfied. Good. Let her believe that. Michael came home later, his tie loosened, his face tired. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hello, Michael." I watched him more carefully than I ever had before. Every movement, every glance, every hesitation. And for the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a man who had made a decision, a man who had chosen something over me. That realization hurt more than anything else, more than the attic, more than the lies, more than the plan. But beneath the hurt, there was something else, something steadier, colder, clarity. That night, as I climbed back up to the attic, I no longer felt like I was being sent away. I felt like I was stepping into a place where I could think, where I could prepare, where I could decide what came next, because now I understood the truth. They had underestimated me. They thought grief had made me weak, that loneliness had made me dependent, that age had made me easier. They were wrong. And for the first time since I moved into that house, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was paying attention. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That was the first thing I learned after reading those emails in the attic. Everything looked the same on the surface, the same quiet mornings, the same polished smiles, the same careful rhythm of the house. But underneath it all, something had shifted permanently. Not in them, in me. I no longer heard Rachel's words the way I used to. I listened differently, carefully. And once I did, I began to notice the pattern. It started with small suggestions. Edna Rachel said one morning as she stood by the kitchen counter stirring her coffee with precise, controlled movements, "Have you thought about simplifying your finances a bit?" I looked up from my tea. "In what way?" "Well," she said lightly, "after everything you've been through, it might be stressful to keep track of so many accounts. It could be easier if things were consolidated." There it was. Subtle. Reasonable. Calculated. "I've managed just fine so far," I replied calmly. "Of course," she said, quickly smiling. "We just want to help." Help! The word had started to feel like a disguise. Later that afternoon, Michael brought it up again. We were alone in the living room. Rachel had stepped out and Lily was upstairs. "Mom," he began, sitting across from me, his elbows resting on his knees, "I've been thinking maybe we should sit down together and go over your finances." I met his eyes. "For what purpose?" He hesitated. "Just to make sure everything's organized. In case anything happens." Anything happens. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "I'm not incapacitated, Michael," I said quietly. "I didn't say you were," he replied quickly. Too quickly. "But that's what you're implying." He leaned back, exhaling. "I'm just trying to be responsible," he said. "You're living with us now. It makes sense for us to be involved. Us. Not me. Not you. Us." I nodded slowly as if I were considering it. "I'll think about it," I said. That seemed to satisfy him. Or at least it gave him something to report back to Rachel. Because later that evening I overheard them again. "She didn't say no," Michael said. "That's because she doesn't want conflict," Rachel replied. "It's predictable." "I don't like pushing her," he muttered. Rachel's voice sharpened. "You don't like pushing anyone, Michael. That's the problem." There was a pause. Then more quietly, "If we don't do this now, we're going to lose everything. Everything." That word carried weight. Debt. Pressure. Desperation. I had suspected it before, but now I was certain. They weren't just greedy. They were cornered, and that made them dangerous. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to believe I was weak, I would let them. The next morning, I moved slower. Not dramatically. Not enough to raise alarm. Just enough to be noticeable. I took longer to answer questions. I asked Rachel to repeat something she had already said once. I paused before responding as if I needed a moment to gather my thoughts. It was subtle, but Rachel noticed. I saw it in the way her eyes lingered on me, evaluating, calculating. Good. Let her think what she wanted. Over the next few days, I continued. I misplaced my reading glasses once, then found them exactly where I had left them. I forgot the name of a restaurant Michael had mentioned the day before. I asked Lily what day of the week it was, even though I knew perfectly well. Each moment was small, harmless on its own, but together they created a picture, a narrative, and Rachel was more than willing to believe it. "She's been a little off lately," I heard her say on the phone one afternoon. "I think it's the grief. It's been hard on her." I stood at the top of the stairs again listening. "Always listening now? We're just trying to make sure she's safe," Rachel continued. "You understand. Safe." That word again. It was becoming their justification for everything. Later that evening, Lily came to the attic. She didn't knock this time. She just pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. "You're doing it on purpose," she said. It wasn't a question. I looked up from the book in my lap. Doing what she crossed her arms. Acting like that. I studied her for a moment. She was sharper than they realized. "Why would I do that?" I asked gently. "Because you heard them," she said. My heart skipped. "What makes you think that?" She shrugged. "Because I hear them too." Silence settled between us. Then she stepped further into the room. "They fight a lot," she said. "Mostly about money." I nodded. I figured. "They think I don't notice," she continued. "But I do." I believed her. "What else have you heard?" I asked. She hesitated. "Then Mom said after the anniversary things will be easier." There it was again. The same phrase. The same timeline. "What do you think she means?" I asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know. But it didn't sound good." "No, it didn't." I leaned back slightly, considering everything. The emails, the conversations, the pressure, the timing. It was all leading somewhere. Something specific, something planned. And whatever it was going to happen after the anniversary. "Lily," I said softly, "I need you to keep paying attention. Not because I want to involve you in something you shouldn't be part of, but because you're already in it." She nodded slowly. "I know." There was a maturity in her that shouldn't have been necessary at her age. "Are you scared?" I asked. She thought about it. "Not for me," she said finally. "For you." That surprised me. I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "I'm not as easy to hurt as they think," I said. She looked at me carefully. "I think they know that," she replied. "That's why they're trying to make you look like you are." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night I lay awake again. But this time the darkness felt different. Not suffocating, not heavy, focused. The attic was no longer just a place they had put me. It was a place where I could see everything clearly. where I could listen without being noticed, where I could prepare, because now I understood something they didn't. They thought they were guiding me toward a decision, but in reality, they were walking straight into one. Once I understood what they were trying to do, I also understood something else. I couldn't fight them the way I normally would. This wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't even betrayal in the simple sense. This was strategy. And strategy required something I hadn't needed in a very long time: careful planning. For most of my life, I had believed in facing things directly. If something was wrong, you said so. If someone hurt you, you confronted it. That was how Robert and I lived, honest, steady, without games. But Robert wasn't here anymore, and the people I was dealing with now were playing a different kind of game. So I had to learn quickly, and the first thing I did was reach out to someone I trusted. Her name was Judith Collins. We had known each other for over 30 years. Our sons had gone to the same elementary school, and back then Judith had been a young mother trying to finish law school while juggling everything else life demanded. I remembered helping her once, watching her son for an entire week when she had exams. She never forgot that. Over the years, we stayed in touch even after life pulled us in different directions. She built a successful career as an estate attorney. I built a life with Robert. We didn't talk every week, but when we did, it was like no time had passed. So when I called her, I didn't explain everything right away. I just said, "Judith, I need to see you. In person." She didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow," she said, "there's a cafe on Main Street, 10 o'clock. The next morning, I told Rachel I had a library luncheon. She seemed pleased. "Good," she said. "It's nice for you to stay socially active." Socially active? I nodded. If only she knew. Judith was already seated when I arrived. She stood the moment she saw me, her expression shifting from warmth to concern in an instant. "Edna," she said, pulling me into a brief hug. "You look tired." "I feel clear," I replied. That made her pause. We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. "I found these," I said. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the first page, and then the next. And the next. I watched her face as she read, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her posture shifted forward, more alert, more focused. By the time she finished, she exhaled slowly and closed the folder. "How long have you known?" she asked. "A few days," I said. "But I've suspected something longer." She nodded. "And they don't know that you know." "No." "That's good," she said immediately. "Very good." There was no panic in her voice, no shock, just calculation. "They're not in control yet," she continued. "Not legally. But they're trying to position themselves to be." "That's what it feels like," I said. "It is," she replied. "They're laying groundwork. Financial pressure, emotional dependency, possibly even trying to establish a narrative about your capacity." "My capacity," I repeated. She looked at me directly. "They want to make it easier to justify decisions on your behalf." I sat back in my chair, absorbing that. "I've been pretending," I said after a moment, "letting them think I'm not as sharp as I am." Judith's eyes narrowed slightly. "How convincing have you been enough for Rachel to start noticing?" A small approving nod. "Good," she said. "Then we can use that. We." The word grounded me. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Judith leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "First, we protect you," she said. Quietly. She began listing things one by one. "We'll review all your accounts, make sure nothing can be accessed without your direct authorization. We'll set up alerts, we'll put safeguards in place." I nodded. "Second, we update your documents," she continued. "Your will, your medical directives, your power of attorney, everything needs to be clear, current, and in your control." "Can they challenge it?" I asked. "They can try," she said, "but not if we do this properly." "And third?" I asked. She held my gaze. "We document everything." That word carried weight. Every conversation, every request, every change in behavior. If they're building a case, we build one too. I let out a slow breath. And then what Judith didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied me. "How far are you willing to go?" she asked. The question surprised me. "I don't want to hurt them," I said honestly. But she pressed. "I thought about the attic, the emails, Robert's memory, Lily. But I won't let them erase me," I said quietly. Judith nodded. "Then we don't confront them yet," she said. "We let them continue." "Continue," I repeated. "Yes," she said. Let them believe their plan is working. Let them get comfortable. People make mistakes when they think they're winning. I understood that. I had already seen it. And when the time comes, I asked. A faint knowing look crossed her face. We choose the moment, she said. Not them. Us. That distinction mattered. We spent the next hour going through details, practical steps, legal protections, quiet strategies. By the time we finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief. Not exactly. But strength. The kind that doesn't come from hope, but from clarity. When I returned to the house, everything looked the same. Rachel greeted me with her usual brightness. Did you have a nice time? She asked. Very, I said. Michael was in the living room, scrolling through something on his laptop. Hey, Mom, he said without looking up. Hello, Michael. I moved through the house calmly, deliberately. Nothing in my expression gave anything away. Because now I understood the most important thing of all. They thought I was alone. They thought I was vulnerable. They thought I was easy. And that was exactly what I needed them to believe. That night, back in the attic, I took out a small notebook. I opened it to the first page, and I began to write. The date, the time, the details, everything, every word, every glance, every moment that mattered. Because Judith was right. If they were building something, so was I. And the difference was, I wasn't building it in the dark. I was building it with purpose, with patience, with precision. And for the first time since I climbed those attic stairs, I knew exactly what I was doing. The hardest part about pretending to be weaker than you are is remembering not to stop. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Act a little slower. Forget a name here, a detail there. Let your voice trail off occasionally. Ask someone to repeat themselves. But the truth is, it takes discipline. Because every instinct in me wanted to stand up straight, look Rachel in the eye, and tell her I knew exactly what she was doing. Every instinct in me wanted to ask Michael how he could sit across from me, his own mother, and participate in something so calculated. But I didn't, because Judith had been right. If they thought they were winning, they would show more. And they did. Within days, Rachel changed. It was subtle at first, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. She stopped pretending as much. Her patience grew thinner, her tone sharper, her smiles less frequent, and when they did appear, they didn't bother to hide the irritation underneath. Edna, you already asked me that, she said one morning when I deliberately repeated a question about Lily's schedule. Oh, I replied, letting my expression soften into mild confusion. Did I? She sighed. It's okay, she said quickly, but there was no kindness in it. Just try to keep track, all right, I nodded. I will. But I didn't. Later that afternoon, I left a cup on the counter without washing it. It was a small thing, but Rachel noticed immediately. Edna, she called from the kitchen, her voice tight, we don't leave dishes out like this. I'm sorry, I said, moving slowly to pick it up. I must have forgotten. You have to be more careful, she said. It's not safe to be careless. Not safe. There it was again. Always that word. Always that angle. Every mistake, real or not, became part of a narrative. And Rachel was collecting them. Michael, on the other hand, became quieter, more distant. He spoke to me less, avoided longer conversations. When he did engage, it was brief, functional, almost rehearsed. Did you take your medication? He asked one evening. I looked at him. I don't take medication. He blinked. Oh, right. But he didn't look embarrassed. He looked distracted, like he had already convinced himself of something that wasn't true. That was when it hit me. He wasn't just going along with Rachel. He was adjusting his perception of me, rewriting it, just like she was. And that realization hurt more than anything else so far, because it meant he wasn't just participating, he was believing. That night, Lily came to the attic again. This time she didn't speak right away. She just sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. They fought again, she said finally. I closed the notebook I had been writing in. About what money, she said. They always fight about money. I wasn't surprised. What did they say? I asked gently. She hesitated. Then she looked up at me, her expression more serious than I had ever seen it. Mom said if this doesn't work, we're going to lose the house. The words settled heavily between us. Lose the house. So it was worse than I thought. How much do they owe? I asked. I don't know, she said. But it's a lot. I nodded slowly. That explained the urgency, the pressure, the timeline. They're not just being greedy, Lily added quietly. They're scared. I considered that. Yes, I said. They are. But that doesn't make it okay, she said quickly. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Silence filled the attic for a moment. Then Lily spoke again. They talk about you like you're not there, she said. Like you're something they have to deal with. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I've noticed, I said. They think you don't understand, she continued. But you do. I met her eyes. Yes, I said simply, I do. She nodded as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. There's something else, she said after a moment. My attention sharpened. What is it? She leaned closer, lowering her voice instinctively. I heard Mom on the phone yesterday, she said. She was talking about after the anniversary again. My pulse slowed, not from fear, but from focus. What did she say? Lily swallowed. She said once everything's signed, it'll be done. Signed. The word landed heavily. What do you think she meant? I asked. Lily shook her head. I don't know. But she sounded relieved. Of course she did. Because in her mind, the plan was already working. I leaned back slightly, processing everything. The documents, the recordings, the conversations, the timing. It was all converging. The anniversary wasn't just a celebration. It was a deadline, a turning point. And whatever they were planning, it was going to happen right after. Lily, I said carefully, I need you to do something for me. She straightened slightly. What? Keep listening, I said. But don't let them know you are. And if you hear anything important, you tell me. She nodded immediately. I will. Then she hesitated. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I thought about Judith, about the plan, about the evidence we were building, about the attic and everything it had shown me. I'm going to let them keep talking, I said. Lily frowned slightly. That's it. For now, I said. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. You're not going to let them win, are you? She asked quietly. I met her gaze, and for the first time since this all began, I allowed a small, controlled smile. No, I said, I'm not. That night after Lily left, I stood by the small window in the attic. The world outside was quiet. The streetlights cast long shadows across the yard. From below, I could hear faint movement, Rachel in the kitchen, Michael pacing somewhere in the house. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because now I understood the truth, they didn't. They thought they were leading me somewhere, guiding me toward a decision I didn't fully understand. But in reality, they were walking exactly where I needed them to go. Step by step, word by word, until the moment came when everything would be revealed, and when it did, there would be no way for them to take it back. The moment I agreed to help pay for their anniversary party, everything changed. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, but inside that house, inside Rachel's carefully controlled world, something shifted. For the first time since I moved in, I saw genuine satisfaction in her eyes. Not politeness, not performance, satisfaction. It happened during breakfast. Rachel was scrolling through her phone, reviewing what looked like a list vendors, I assumed, while Michael drank his coffee in silence. Lily sat across from me, quiet as usual, but watching. I've been thinking, I said calmly, setting my cup down. Rachel looked up immediately. Yes, about your anniversary, I continued. 20 years is significant. Her expression softened slightly, but I could still see the alertness beneath it. It is, she said. We want to do something special. I think you should, I replied. And I'd like to help. The silence that followed was subtle but unmistakable. Michael's hand paused midair. Rachel blinked once. What do you mean? She asked. I said, keeping my voice steady, almost gentle. I'd like to contribute. Consider it a gift. Rachel leaned back slightly, studying me. A gift, she repeated. Yes, I said. For both of you. I let the words settle. I watched the way her mind worked, quickly, efficiently, assessing possibilities, risks, advantages. And what exactly did you have in mind? She asked. I smiled faintly. Well, I know these events can get expensive. Catering decorations, all the little details. I'd be happy to take care of some of that. Michael looked at me then. Really looked. There was something in his expression, surprise, yes, but also something else. Relief. You don't have to do that, Mom, he said automatically. But his voice lacked conviction. I want to, I replied. Rachel tilted her head slightly. That's very generous, she said. Are you sure I am? Another pause. And then, all right, she said slowly. If you're offering, we can certainly accept. Of course you can, I thought. Of course you can. What would you like to cover? She asked. I had already thought about that. Let me handle the floral arrangements, I said. And the catering upgrade. And perhaps a video montage, something meaningful. Something that reflects your life together. Rachel's eyes lit up. That would be beautiful, she said. Actually, I've been thinking about a montage. Something elegant. Something that really tells our story. I'd be happy to arrange it, I said. Michael nodded. That sounds great, he said. Really, Mom? Thank you. I smiled. You're welcome. But across the table, Lily was staring at me. Not confused. Not surprised. She understood. That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone in this. The next few days moved quickly. Rachel threw herself into planning with renewed energy. She spoke more openly now, more confidently, as if my agreement had confirmed something for her. You see, she said to Michael one afternoon, unaware that I was within earshot, I told you she'd come around, as if I had been resisting something inevitable, as if this had always been the outcome she expected. Michael didn't respond, but he didn't disagree either. I kept my role simple, agreeable, supportive, helpful. I asked questions about color schemes. I complimented her choices. I nodded at her ideas. All the while I was making my own arrangements. Judith handled the legal side quietly, ensuring everything connected to my finances was secure. But the party was mine. Every vendor Rachel approved went through me. Every contract, every payment, every detail. Carefully, deliberately, under my control. The florist was the first. A woman named Denise, recommended by Rachel, who specialized in large, elegant installations. Rachel mentioned you'd be covering this, Denise said when we spoke on the phone. That's right, I replied. We discussed arrangements, color palettes, layout, soft whites, pale golds, subtle greenery, classic, refined, exactly what Rachel wanted. Everything will be delivered and set up the morning of the event, Denise assured me. Perfect, I said. The caterer came next. Rachel insisted on upgrading from their original plan, something more upscale, more impressive. It has to look right, she said. People notice these things. I agreed. Of course I did. But I made one small adjustment. Make sure the presentation is seamless, I told the coordinator. Timing matters, he assured me it would be. Then came the most important part, the video. Rachel was excited about this. This is going to be the centerpiece, she said one evening, showing me a collection of photos on her tablet. Our wedding, Lily's birth, vacations, all the highlights. It sounds lovely, I said. I want it to feel emotional, she continued. Like a journey. It will, I replied. Because it would be. Just not the one she expected. I contacted a production company. Judith recommended discreet professional experienced in handling sensitive material. I need a montage prepared, I told them. Of course, the man on the phone said, What kind of content are we working with? I paused for a moment. Then a story, I said, but not the one everyone thinks they're going to see. There was a brief silence. Then I understand, he replied. Good, because I needed someone who did. Over the next week, I provided everything. The recordings, the documents, the emails, every piece of truth I had gathered. Are you sure you want all of this included? He asked at one point. Yes, I said. Even the more personal elements, yes. Another pause. This will be impactful, he said carefully. I know. That was the point. Back at the house, Rachel grew more relaxed by the day. She smiled more, complained less, even included me in conversations again, though now it felt different. Not warmer, just strategic. Edna, could you double-check the guest list? She asked one afternoon. Of course. Make sure we didn't miss anyone important. Important. That word again. Everything for Rachel was about perception, image, status, what people saw, which made what I was planning even more fitting. Michael, on the other hand, seemed almost lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. He spoke to me more casually now, even laughed once or twice. It was strange, watching him relax, watching him believe that everything was working out, that everything was under control, that nothing was coming. But Lily didn't relax. She watched me, every movement, every conversation. And one evening, as we stood alone in the kitchen, she spoke quietly. "You're really doing it," she said. "Yes," I replied. She hesitated. "What's going to happen?" I met her eyes. "The truth," I said. She swallowed. "That's going to hurt them." I didn't look away. "They were planning to hurt me quietly," I said. "This will be louder." She nodded slowly. "I'll be ready," she said. I believed her. That night back in the attic, I stood by the window again. The house was quiet, still, everything in place, everything moving exactly as planned. They thought I had accepted my role, that I had finally become what they needed me to be. Compliant, grateful, manageable. But in reality, I had simply stepped into position. And now, all that was left was the right moment. The closer we got to the anniversary, the more careful Rachel became. Not softer, not kinder, just more precise. Every conversation felt measured, like she was choosing her words with a specific outcome in mind. Every interaction had a purpose. And for the first time since I moved into that house, she stopped pretending that everything was casual. Because it wasn't. It was time. The documents appeared 3 days before the party. Rachel brought them to me in the afternoon when the house was quiet, and Michael had just returned from work. Lily was upstairs, or at least that's what Rachel assumed. "Edna," she said, stepping into the kitchen with a neat stack of papers in her hand, "we just need to go over a few things." Her tone was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. Michael stood behind her, not quite meeting my eyes. I looked at the papers. "And what are these?" I asked. "Just some simple forms," Rachel said lightly. "Nothing complicated. It's more about organization than anything else." Organization. Of course. She placed the papers on the table and slid them toward me. I didn't reach for them immediately. Organization of what I asked. "Our shared responsibilities," she replied smoothly. "Since you're living with us now, it makes sense to have everything clearly outlined." I finally picked up the first page. At a glance, it looked harmless enough: formal language, structured sections, nothing alarming on the surface. But I had already learned how to read between the lines. Temporary financial assistance agreement. I kept my expression neutral. "This allows us to help manage certain expenses on your behalf," Rachel continued, "just to make things easier for you." "For me," I repeated. "Yes," she said, "so you don't have to worry about the details." I flipped to the next page. Authorization clauses, access permissions, terms that seemed reasonable until you looked closely, until you understood what they meant. "This gives you access to my accounts," I said quietly. Rachel smiled. "Only in a limited capacity," she said. "Strictly for household-related expenses." "And who decides what qualifies as that?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "We would," she said. "Of course you would." I glanced at Michael. He shifted slightly. "It's just to help Mom," he said. "You don't have to handle everything alone." There it was again, that word, help. I placed the papers back on the table carefully. "I'd like some time to review this," I said. Rachel's smile tightened. "There's really no need," she said. "It's all very straightforward." "I'm sure it is," I replied calmly, "but I'd still like to take a closer look." A brief silence followed. Then Rachel nodded. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said, "Don't take too long." That night, I took the documents up to the attic. I didn't read them immediately. Instead, I sat at the small desk, letting the weight of them settle. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. The emails, the conversations, the pressure, all leading to this, a signature. A single act that would give them exactly what they wanted. Control. But I wasn't alone anymore. I scanned every page and sent copies to Judith that same evening. Her response came within the hour. "These are worse than I expected." I read that line twice. Worse. That meant something. We spoke on the phone shortly after. "They've structured this very carefully," Judith said. "On the surface, it looks like standard assistance, but the language is broad enough to give them significant access." "How significant?" I asked. "If you sign this," she said, "you're effectively giving them control over how your money is used." My chest tightened. "And if I don't?" "They'll push harder," she said, "or they'll adjust their approach." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's fine," I said. "Let them." There was a pause on the other end. "You're planning something," she said. "Yes." Another pause. Be careful, she added. Make sure you don't act too soon. I won't. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then, there was a soft knock on the door. Come in, I said. Lily stepped inside. She looked nervous. I have something, she said. My attention sharpened. What is it? She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a small flash drive. I found this in Mom's desk, she said. I don't think she meant for anyone to see it. I took it slowly. What's on it, I don't know exactly, she said. But I heard her talking about recordings. Recordings. My pulse slowed, focused. Thank you, I said. She nodded. Just be careful, she added. I will. After she left, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. At first, there was nothing unusual. A few documents. Some folders. And then audio files. Dozens of them. I clicked on the first one. Rachel's voice filled the room immediately. Sharp. Unfiltered. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. She's not contributing, she's just sitting there. I stopped the recording. Took a breath. Then pressed play again. Once this is done, we won't have to deal with this anymore. Another file. She doesn't even realize what's happening. Another provisos. Michael needs to stop hesitating. This is the only way out. My grip tightened on the edge of the desk, file after file, each one revealing more frustration, more calculation, more truth. And then Michael's voice. Fainter, less certain. I don't like this. Rachel again. You like losing the house more. Silence. Then, once the anniversary is over, we'll handle her. I froze. Handle her. The same words, the same plan. Confirmed. I leaned back slowly, staring at the screen. This wasn't just evidence. This was exposure. Complete. Undeniable. I sat there for a long time listening. Every word. Every tone. Every moment. Until there was nothing left to question. Nothing left to guess. I knew exactly what they were doing. And now I had everything I needed. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I was ready. There are betrayals you prepare yourself for. And then there are the ones that break something so deep inside you. You don't even recognize the person you were before them. I thought I had already reached that point. I thought the attic had been the worst of it. I thought discovering their plan, the emails, the documents, the recordings, was the moment everything inside me shifted. I was wrong. Because nothing prepared me for what I found next. It happened the following morning. I hadn't slept. The night had been spent listening, organizing, thinking, lining every piece of truth in my mind until it formed a clear, undeniable picture. I knew what they were planning. I knew how they were going to do it, and I knew when. But there was still one question left in my mind. How far had Michael gone, not just in agreement, not just in silence, but in action? The answer came in a place I had almost forgotten about. Rachel's office. It wasn't a large room, just a converted study near the back of the house, clean, minimal, controlled like everything else she touched. I had avoided it out of instinct, the same way you avoid stepping into a space that doesn't belong to you. But that morning something told me to go inside. The house was quiet. Rachel had left early. Michael was already at work. Lily was at school. I stood in the doorway for a moment listening. Nothing. Then I stepped in. The room smelled faintly of paper and something citrusy, another one of Rachel's carefully chosen details. Her desk was immaculate. Too immaculate. Drawers aligned perfectly. No clutter. No visible disorganization. But I had learned something about Rachel. She didn't eliminate things. She hid them. I moved slowly, deliberately. The first drawer contained nothing but neatly stacked folders, household bills, insurance documents, nothing unusual. The second drawer held office supplies. Pens, notepads, paper clips, perfectly arranged. The third drawer, locked. I paused. Of course it was. For a moment I considered leaving it alone, but then I remembered the attic, the emails, the flash drive. And I knew, if there was something she didn't want anyone to see, it would be here. I didn't force it. That would have been reckless. Instead, I closed the drawer gently and stepped back, because I didn't need to open it yet. Not when I had another way. That evening, I waited. I listened. I watched. And when Rachel went upstairs to take a shower, I moved. Her handbag was on the kitchen counter. She always kept it close, always within reach, careful, controlled, but not careful enough. I opened it quietly, my movements steady, my breath slow. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. Wallet, phone, keys, and a small leather case. I opened it. Inside was a set of spare keys, house keys, office keys, and one small silver key that didn't match the others. I memorized it. Then I closed everything, exactly as I had found it. No trace, no mistake. The next morning, when the house was empty again, I returned to the office. This time, I went straight to the third drawer. The small silver key slid into the lock smoothly. For a moment I hesitated, because something inside me knew whatever was in that drawer would change everything. Then I turned the key. The lock clicked softly. I opened the drawer. Inside were several items, a few folders, a small metal box, and something wrapped carefully in cloth. I reached for the folders first. Documents, more financial records, more evidence of their situation, debt statements, overdue notices, numbers that told a story I had already begun to understand. They weren't just struggling, they were drowning. I set the folders aside and opened the metal box. Inside, cash. Not a large amount, but enough to suggest desperation. Emergency money, hidden money, the kind people keep when they're afraid of what's coming. And then, the cloth. My hands slowed as I reached for it. Carefully, I unwrapped it. And the moment I saw what was inside, everything stopped. Robert's watch. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared. The same watch he had worn for years. The one he took off only once when he was in the hospital, when he pressed it into Michael's hand and said, "Take care of your mother." Michael had told me it was lost, gone during the move, something that had simply disappeared. But it hadn't. It had been here, hidden, wrapped, like something that needed to be kept out of sight. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe that was just the weight of everything it represented. I closed my eyes for a moment, and then I saw it. Not the attic, not Rachel, Michael. Standing in that hospital room, nodding as Robert spoke, promising something he clearly never intended to keep. I opened my eyes slowly and looked back into the drawer. There was more. Beneath the cloth, a stack of envelopes. I recognized them immediately. Robert's handwriting. Letters. He had written them in the final weeks of his life. Some for me, some for Michael, and one for Lily. I picked up the envelope with her name on it. It was still sealed. Never opened. Never given. My chest tightened. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. Not of money, of meaning, of memory, of something sacred. And then I saw the final piece, a small document folded neatly and placed beneath the letters. I unfolded it carefully, and there it was, a handwritten note from Robert, simple, direct, clear, a statement of intent. A portion of his savings, modest but meaningful, set aside specifically for Lily's future. Education. Opportunity. A start. Michael had told me those funds had been used for unexpected expenses, that they were gone. But now I knew the truth. They weren't gone. They had been taken, used, hidden. My hands lowered slowly. The room felt different now. Not smaller, not heavier, just clearer. Everything was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about what they had done to me. This was about Robert, about what he had trusted Michael to protect, about what Michael had chosen to destroy, and about Lily, who had been unknowingly robbed of something meant for her, a future, a promise, a piece of her grandfather. I carefully placed everything back exactly as I had found it. The watch, the letters, the document, the cloth, the box, the drawer, locked, sealed, hidden again, because I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Not until the right moment, not until it would matter most. That evening, when Michael walked into the house, I watched him differently. Not as my son, not as someone I was trying to understand, but as someone I finally saw clearly. "Hey, Mom," he said, setting his keys down. "Hello, Michael." Our eyes met, and for a brief moment I wondered if he could see it, if he could feel the shift, if he knew that something had changed, but he didn't. He smiled faintly, looked away, carried on, because in his mind, everything was still under control. Everything was still going according to plan. And maybe that was the most painful part of all. Not what he had done, but how easily he continued afterward. That night I went back to the attic, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a place of waiting. It felt like a place of decision, because now I knew, without doubt, without hesitation, without confusion. Whatever happened next wasn't just about exposing them. It was about restoring something they had taken, something they had no right to touch. And this time, I wasn't just prepared. I was certain. The day of the anniversary arrived with a kind of brightness that felt almost ironic. Sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, as if the house itself had decided to dress up for the occasion. By mid-morning, the quiet suburban street outside had already begun to change, cars arriving earlier than expected, vendors unloading carefully packed boxes, voices calling out instructions in clipped, efficient tones. Inside, Rachel was everywhere. She moved through the house like a conductor, directing every detail with sharp precision. Her phone was in one hand, a clipboard in the other. Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it, excitement mixed with pressure. "No, the arrangements go by the staircase, not the entry table," she instructed the florist. "We need impact the moment people walk in." Denise nodded, adjusting quickly. "Yes, of course." The flowers were exactly as planned, soft whites, pale gold accents, cascading greenery. Elegant, impressive, perfectly aligned with the image Rachel wanted to present. I watched quietly from the side, unnoticed for the most part. Invisible, just as she preferred. Michael spent most of the morning pacing between rooms, adjusting small details that didn't need adjusting, straightening things that were already straight, checking things that had already been checked. He was nervous. Not about me, about appearances. "Do we have enough wine?" he asked Rachel for the third time. "Yes, Michael," she replied, not even looking at him. "We have more than enough." Lily stayed mostly out of the way, but every now and then, her eyes found mine. And when they did, she didn't look afraid, she looked ready. By early afternoon, the house had transformed completely. The dining area was set with polished glassware and carefully arranged place settings. The living room had been cleared just enough to create space for gathering conversation and, most importantly, the large screen set up near the far wall. The screen. I watched as the technician adjusted it, connecting cables, testing the system. "Everything will run smoothly," he assured Rachel. "We've got the file ready." Rachel smiled, satisfied. "Perfect," she said. "Perfect. That word again?" I wondered if she had any idea how close she was to the truth. By late afternoon, I went upstairs to the attic for the last time. Not to hide, not to wait, but to prepare. I stood in the small space, looking around at the low ceiling, the narrow bed, the single window that had watched me change from something uncertain into something deliberate. This place had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it had sharpened me. I reached for the dress I had set aside. It wasn't new. It wasn't extravagant. But it was one of Robert's favorites. A deep, soft blue that he once told me made me look steady. Not beautiful, not young, steady. At the time, I had laughed. Now I understood. I dressed slowly, carefully, every movement intentional. When I was done, I looked at myself in the small mirror propped against the wall. I didn't see the woman who had climbed those stairs weeks ago. I saw someone else, someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. When I came downstairs, Rachel noticed immediately. "Oh," she said, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "You look nice." There was something in her tone. Surprise. Maybe even a hint of discomfort. "Thank you," I said simply. Michael glanced at me, then looked away quickly. "You didn't have to dress up," he muttered. "I wanted to," I replied. He nodded but didn't say anything else. The first guests began arriving shortly after. Neighbors, colleagues, friends from church. People who knew Michael and Rachel as a successful, stable couple. People who admired them, respected them, envied them perhaps. "Happy anniversary," someone called as they stepped inside. "Thank you," Rachel replied warmly, her smile flawless. She moved through the room effortlessly, greeting each guest, accepting compliments, presenting herself exactly as she intended. Gracious, put together, in control. Michael followed her lead, shaking hands, making small talk, playing his part. And me, I stood slightly to the side, acknowledged when necessary, ignored when convenient, exactly where they wanted me, exactly where they thought I would stay. But tonight, that was going to change. As the room filled, the energy shifted. Laughter grew louder, conversations overlapped, glasses clinked softly. The soft music in the background blended with the hum of voices, creating the illusion of something warm, something genuine. Rachel thrived in it. I watched her as she moved from group to group telling stories, accepting praise. "You've done such a beautiful job," one woman said. Rachel smiled. "Thank you. It means a lot." "This house is stunning," another added. "We're very lucky," Rachel replied. "Lucky." Yes. That was one word for it. At one point, Rachel raised her glass, calling for attention. "Everyone," she said, her voice clear and confident, "thank you so much for being here tonight. It means the world to us to celebrate this milestone with people we care about." The room quieted. Michael stepped beside her, placing a hand lightly on her back. 20 years, Rachel continued. "It hasn't always been easy, but we've built something strong, something lasting." I felt Lily's gaze on me, steady, aware. "And tonight," Rachel added, "we wanted to share a little piece of that journey with you." She gestured toward the screen. "A video," she said. "A look back at where we started and everything we've built together." Polite applause followed. Guests turned their attention toward the screen. The technician nodded, ready. Rachel glanced at me briefly. "Thank you, Edna," she said sweetly, "for helping make this possible." I met her eyes. "You're welcome," I said. And for the first time, there was no softness in my voice. The lights dimmed slightly. The room quieted. The screen flickered to life. Soft music began to play. Images appeared. Rachel in a white dress smiling on her wedding day. Michael beside her, younger, hopeful. Photos of vacations, of birthdays, of Lily as a child. Laughter filled the room again. "Oh, look at that one," someone whispered. "So sweet," another said. Rachel leaned into Michael, her expression warm, proud. Perfect. Exactly as she had imagined. Exactly as she had planned. I stood still, watching, waiting, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't their story anymore. Not tonight. For the first 30 seconds, everything went exactly the way Rachel wanted. Soft music filled the room, something gentle, nostalgic. The screen glowed with warm tones, each image carefully chosen to tell a story of love, success, and stability. Rachel smiled, her hand resting lightly on Michael's arm. "That was our first trip to Napa," she whispered to a guest nearby. "And that one, Lily's 5th birthday," Michael added, forcing a laugh. Around them, people leaned closer to the screen, nodding, smiling, murmuring quietly. "It's beautiful. So well put together. You two have built something really special." Yes, that was the narrative. That was the image. That was the lie. I stood near the edge of the room, my posture calm, my expression composed. From where I stood, I could see everything: the guests, the screen, Rachel's face, Michael's shifting eyes, Lily standing slightly behind the crowd. And I could feel it. The exact moment it was about to change. The music faded. Not abruptly. Just enough. Just enough to create a pause. A subtle shift. On the screen, the last photo lingered, Rachel and Michael smiling into the camera, frozen in a moment that now felt staged. Then black. A few people leaned forward. A small frown here. A confused glance there. "Is that part of it?" someone whispered. The silence stretched. Then a voice. Rachel's voice. "I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. She's not contributing, she's just sitting there." The room froze. At first, it didn't register, not fully, because the tone was different, sharper, colder, unfiltered. Rachel's smile faltered. "What is that?" she said, stepping forward slightly. On the screen, nothing but darkness, but the voice continued. "Once this is done, we won't have to deal with this anymore." A ripple moved through the room, confusion turning into discomfort. "Turn that off," Rachel said quickly, her voice tight. But no one moved, because now they were listening. Another clip. "She doesn't even realize what's happening." A woman near the back gasped softly. Michael's hand dropped from Rachel's arm. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the next voice was his. "I don't like this." The room went completely still. Rachel turned toward him, her eyes wide, her expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. "Michael." But it was too late. "You like losing the house more," Rachel's recorded voice cut in. Silence. "And then, once the anniversary is over, we'll handle her." The words landed heavily, unmistakably, irrevocably. Someone in the room stepped back, another turned away. The illusion cracked, and then it shattered. Rachel lunged toward the screen. "Turn it off," she shouted. "This is ridiculous." But my technician, didn't move. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was the truth. And it wasn't finished. The screen flickered. This time, images appeared. Not the ones Rachel had chosen. Not curated. Not polished. Documents. Emails. Lines of text highlighted in sharp contrast. Once Edna's funds are accessible, assisted living placement may simplify matters. Michael agrees this is the most practical path. A murmur spread through the crowd. "What is that? Are those real?" Rachel's face drained of color. "This is taken out of context," she snapped, turning toward the guests. This is manipulation." But the screen didn't stop. More evidence. More truth. And then, the final piece. A photograph. Robert's watch. Lying in the drawer. Hidden, followed by a scan of the handwritten note. Clear, undeniable, a gift intended for Lily. Misused. Taken. The room went silent again, not confused this time, not uncertain, but aware. Fully. Painfully. Aware. I stepped forward then. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just into the center of the room. Rachel turned toward me, her expression no longer controlled. "You did this," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes," I replied. Michael stared at me. "Mom." "What is this?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see my son. I saw the truth. "This," I said calmly, "is what happens when people think no one is paying attention." The room held its breath. Rachel shook her head. "This is a setup," she said. "You've twisted everything." "I didn't twist anything," I said quietly. I showed it. Her mouth opened. Closed. No words came, because there were none left. Michael stepped forward. "You could have talked to us," he said, his voice strained. I met his gaze. "Would you have listened?" I asked. He didn't answer. Because he knew. "No," I continued. "You wouldn't have." The silence deepened. Around us, people shifted. Uncomfortable. Witnessing something they hadn't expected. Something real. "You wanted to manage me," I said. "Control me. Move me out of the way once you had what you needed." "That's not true," Rachel snapped. I turned to her. "Then why was I in the attic?" I asked. She froze. "Why were you planning to access my accounts?" I continued. "Why were you preparing to place me in assisted living?" Her silence answered for her. Michael looked between us, his face pale. "I didn't," he started. "Yes, you did," I said. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. "You knew," I added. That was the moment he broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, but visibly. His shoulders dropped. His eyes lowered. And whatever he had been holding on to collapsed. Rachel looked at him stunned. "You're just going to stand there," she demanded, but he didn't respond, because there was nothing left to defend. I turned slightly, my gaze moving across the room, at the people watching, at the truth settling in. "When people believe you're powerless," I said, my voice steady, "they stop hiding who they really are." No one interrupted. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. Rachel took a step back, then another. Her perfect image gone. Michael stood still. Lily was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. And that hurt more than anything else. I moved toward her, gently, carefully, because this wasn't about destruction. Not entirely. It was about truth. And truth is never gentle. The silence after the video ended was heavier than anything that had come before it. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with confusion. It was the kind filled with understanding. No one needed further explanation. No one asked questions. The truth had already done its work, clear, undeniable, irreversible. Rachel stood frozen near the center of the room, her breathing uneven, her hands clenched at her sides. The woman who had spent weeks controlling every detail, every perception, every narrative, now had nothing left to hold on to. "This is not what it looks like," she said, finally, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. No one responded, because everyone in that room knew exactly what it looked like. Michael took a step backward as if distance might somehow undo what had just happened. "Rachel," he began, but she turned on him immediately. "No," she snapped. "Don't start now. This is your fault, too." "My fault," he repeated, stunned. "Yes," she said, her voice rising. "If you had just followed through, if you hadn't hesitated, he cut in anger, breaking through. You're the one who pushed this. I pushed it because we needed it," she shot back. "Or did you forget the bills, the debt, the fact that we're barely holding everything together?" Their voices overlapped, sharp and raw. For the first time, the truth wasn't hidden behind closed doors. It was exposed, fully. And there was no controlling it now. "This was your plan," Michael said, his voice shaking. "You made it sound like it was the only option." "It was the only option," Rachel insisted. "We were out of time, so you thought this was the answer," he demanded. "Taking from my mother, I thought surviving was the answer," she fired back. The room shifted uncomfortably. Guests glanced at one another, unsure whether to stay or leave, unsure where to look, unsure how to react to something so deeply personal unraveling in front of them. And in the middle of it all, I stood still, not detached, not unaffected, but steady. Because this moment, this was the consequence. Not of what I had done, but of what they had chosen. Judith stepped forward then, calm, composed, exactly as I knew she would be. "Perhaps we should lower our voices," she said quietly, though her presence alone was enough to command attention. Rachel turned toward her, confused. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Judith Collins," she replied. "Estate attorney." The words landed. Heavy. Rachel's expression shifted again, this time not to anger, but to realization. "You," she started, then stopped. "Yes," Judith said simply. Michael looked at me. "You knew?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For how long?" "Long enough." That answer was enough. Rachel let out a short, bitter laugh. "So this was all planned," she said. "The party, the video, everything. I didn't deny it." "No," I said, "not everything." She frowned. "Just the truth," I added. Her expression hardened. "You humiliated us," she said. I held her gaze. "You were planning to erase me," I replied. The words settled between us, clear, final. Rachel looked away first. That was the moment I knew. It was over. Not just the argument, not just the night, but everything they had tried to build on lies. Michael sank into one of the chairs, his hands covering his face. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered. But that wasn't true. He had known. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every consequence, but enough. Enough to choose, enough to act, and enough to fail. Across the room, Lily stood near the edge of the crowd, her eyes red, her expression overwhelmed. I walked toward her slowly. She didn't move away. She didn't hesitate. "Grandma," she whispered. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's all right," I said softly. But we both knew. It wasn't. Not yet. Not for her. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About Grandpa's things," I nodded. "Yes." Her lips pressed together as she tried to hold back tears. "They told me it was gone," she said. "I know," I replied. She looked toward her parents, then back at me. Why would they do that? I didn't answer immediately. Because there wasn't a simple answer. Because sometimes the truth is complicated in ways that don't make sense, especially to someone who deserves better. "Because they were afraid," I said finally, "and they made the wrong choice." She nodded slowly. That was enough for now. Behind us, the room had begun to thin. Guests were leaving quietly, offering brief, awkward goodbyes, avoiding eye contact, unwilling to linger in the aftermath of something so personal. The perfect evening Rachel had planned gone, replaced by something real, something she could never undo. Judith approached again, her voice low. "We should go," she said. I nodded. There was nothing left for me there. Not anymore. Before I turned to leave, I looked at Michael one last time. He hadn't moved, still sitting, still silent, still avoiding the reality in front of him. "Michael," I said. He looked up slowly. For a moment I saw it. Regret. Guilt. Something close to recognition. "I didn't raise you to do this," I said quietly. His eyes dropped. "I know," he whispered. That was all he said. And for the first time, it was enough. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. Just acknowledgement. I turned away. Lily stepped beside me. Without hesitation, without asking. She chose, "Can I come with you?" she asked softly. I looked at her, at the strength in her eyes, at the uncertainty she was trying to hide. "Yes," I said. We walked toward the door together, past the remnants of the party, past the flowers, past the carefully arranged image that had fallen apart piece by piece. And as we stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt it. Not relief. Not exactly. But something close. Because for the first time since I climbed those attic stairs, I was no longer inside their story. I was walking out of it. The night we left that house, I didn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because I already knew exactly what I was leaving behind. Illusion, control, and a version of family that had quietly unraveled long before I ever stepped into the attic. Lily sat beside me in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't speak much during the drive. Neither did I. Some silences don't need to be filled, they need to be respected. Streetlights passed over us in soft intervals, casting brief shadows across her face. I could see the weight she was carrying, not just what she had witnessed that night, but what she had come to understand. About her parents, about truth, about trust. "You don't have to stay with me," I said gently after a while. "Not if you're not ready." She shook her head immediately. "I don't want to go back there tonight," she said. I nodded. That's enough. We arrived at Judith's place first. She had insisted. "Just for the night," she said earlier. "You shouldn't be alone after something like that." Her home was warm in a way that felt unfamiliar after everything I had been through. Lived in, welcoming, unguarded, the kind of space where nothing felt staged. She opened the door before we even reached it. "You're here," she said, relief clear in her voice. "We are," I replied. She looked at Lily, then back at me, understanding everything without needing to ask. "Come in," she said softly. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without listening for footsteps below me, without wondering what was being said behind closed doors, without feeling like I was being positioned. The attic was gone, and with it, the version of myself that had been forced to shrink to fit inside it. The days that followed were not easy. Truth rarely leads to immediate peace. Rachel moved quickly. Within 48 hours, she had filed for divorce. Not quietly, not carefully, but aggressively. She tried to shift the narrative, portray herself as the victim, claim the situation had been misunderstood, manipulated, exaggerated. But truth has a way of anchoring itself. And this time, there was too much of it. The recordings, the documents, the emails. Everything was clear. Everything was documented. Everything was undeniable. Michael didn't fight her. He didn't defend himself either. He simply stopped. Judith handled everything with precision. Legal protections, financial recovery, documentation of Robert's original intent, and most importantly, restoring what had been taken. The money Robert had set aside for Lily was secured again, placed into a protected account, one that no one could access without oversight. The letters were returned, untouched, waiting, and the watch, I kept it, not as a possession, but as a reminder of what had been broken and what still mattered. A few weeks later, I moved into a new place, a small condo near the shoreline. Nothing extravagant, nothing showy, but it was mine. The windows faced the water. The light in the mornings was soft and steady, not harsh or overwhelming. The space felt open, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't adjusting myself to fit into someone else's life. I was rebuilding my own. Lily came often. At first, just weekends, then more. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she needed somewhere that felt honest. We spent hours together, talking, reading, going through Robert's letters one by one, the one he had written for her. She opened it slowly, carefully, like something fragile. She didn't read it out loud, but when she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "He believed in me," she said. "Yes," I replied. "He always did." That was something no one could take from her. Not anymore. Michael reached out once. A phone call. I didn't answer. Not because I hated him, but because I wasn't ready. And maybe because some things don't need to be rushed. Healing isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about distance, about clarity, about understanding what you can carry forward and what you have to leave behind. As for Rachel, her world didn't collapse all at once, but it shifted, slowly. I heard things. Through mutual acquaintances, through quiet conversations, opportunities that disappeared, people who stopped calling, trust that didn't return, not because of what I had done, but because of what had been revealed. Because once people see the truth, they don't forget it. And the anniversary. The night that was meant to celebrate 20 years of something carefully constructed, it became something else entirely. Not revenge, not exactly, but exposure. And maybe that's why I still think about it sometimes. Not with guilt, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. Because what I did that night wasn't about destroying them. It was about refusing to disappear. They wanted to move me quietly, manage me, reduce me, until I became something easier to control. But I chose something else. I chose to be seen, even if it was uncomfortable, even if it was unforgivable in their eyes. And maybe that's what truth always is, unforgivable. To the people who depended on the lie. Now in the quiet of my new home, I sit by the window some mornings and watch the water move, slow, steady, unstoppable. And I think about everything that happened, the attic, the silence, the plan, the moment it all came apart. And I realize something simple. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost the illusion of one. And in its place, I found something real, something honest, something that no longer asks me to shrink, to stay quiet, or to pretend. I found myself, and that was worth everything. There is something people don't talk about enough, how grief can make you vulnerable in ways you don't even recognize. When you lose someone you love, you don't just lose them. You lose the structure of your life, the rhythm of your days, the quiet certainty that someone is standing beside you. And in that space, it becomes easier for others to step in, not always with kindness, but with intention. Family is supposed to be where we feel safest, but sometimes it's where we are most easily overlooked. Because betrayal from a stranger is sharp, but betrayal from family is slow. It wears a familiar face. It speaks in gentle tones. It hides behind words like help and care until you almost believe it. And that's what makes it dangerous. What I learned is this: silence protects the wrong people. Endurance, when it comes at the cost of your dignity, is not strength. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only thing that restores you. Did I go too far? Maybe. There are moments when I still ask myself that. But then I remember the attic, the plan, the quiet way they were preparing to erase me. And I know I didn't create that truth. I revealed it. And sometimes that's the only way to survive. If you've ever felt overlooked, pushed aside, or made to feel smaller than you are, I want you to know this. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to speak. And you are allowed to choose yourself even when it's difficult. Before you go, I'd really love to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Do you think I went too far? Or did I do what needed to be done? And where are you watching from today, and what time is it there? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Stories like this remind us we are never as alone as we think.